Hello and welcome to today's video. It is December 23rd, the day before Christmas Eve, and so it would not be Christmas without some sort of red attire on, hence the red hat, and of course, my Marv t-shirt. Yes, this is Marv from Home Alone, and if you do not know what Home Alone is, then I'm sorry, you must have been living under a rock the past couple of decades. Just look at it. It's Marv from Home Alone. He even has the iron imprinted on his forehead. Just take it all in. Go ahead. This is by far the most cherished piece of attire that I own. In all honesty, I look forward every year to having an excuse to wear it, and this is that time. Okay, enough Christmas stuff. Today we are here to talk about dyeing fretboards, rosewood fretboards, not maple because that would be weird. And the dye of choice is going to be Fiebings or Fiebings. I don't know how to say it. I'm sorry, Mr. Fiebing. You make a great product. I will go into further detail, of course, in the rest of this video. But for now, this is what we're dealing with, and it is dark brown. They also make a variety of colors. I think burgundy and definitely black, some other colors. But myself, I was interested in either the black or the dark brown. I went with the dark brown because I didn't want an ebony fretboard per se, and I'm happy with the results. And of course, I'll show you that later on in the video. This is a little bit of a departure from the current series that I'm doing on my Telecaster guitar, but I will continue with that series and wrap that up in the near future. This is the fretboard that I used the dye on in its current state. This is a partscaster Strat, and I have a lot of videos on this. If you follow my channel at all, you know about that. I've got probably 35 to 40 videos about how I put this guitar together and relicked it and all that fun stuff. But one of the things I wasn't happy with when I was all said and done with the guitar was that the fretboard looked a little pale and anemic and a little bit, well, not vintage. This is a rosewood fretboard. I don't know if it's Indian or Brazilian. I don't think it's Brazilian or some other type of species of rosewood, but I got it from Musicraft and it is a rosewood fretboard, and it was fairly dark, just not dark enough. But suffice it to say that I am very happy with the way the fretboard looks, and also as a bonus, the fretboard markers. So in some previous videos that I made, I attempted to remedy the fretboard and the fretboard markers on this particular guitar. One of the things that I used on the fretboard itself was this F1 oil from using Nomad, and I do highly recommend this as a fretboard conditioner. I believe it works well to sort of keep the fretboard well moisturized and conditioned, and I believe it probably does darken the fretboard over time, but not a great deal, especially in a short amount of time. So I do highly recommend this. I do have a video specifically on this stuff, and if you're interested in watching that, you can click up here in the eye on the upper part of the screen, and that'll take you to it. Now, as far as the fretboard markers on my Stratocaster, they were also a little bit pale for my taste. I go into more detail in other videos, but essentially when I ordered the neck, I specified imitation clay dots. I could have ordered aged clay dots, and I should have, but at the time I didn't even think about it. So I had this relic guitar, heavy relic guitar, and I had imitation clay dots, but they really weren't as dark as I wanted them. So like I said, in a previous video that I made, I attempted to permanently darken the fretboard markers on the Stratocaster guitar. And again, if you're interested, click up here on the eye and it'll take you to it. In that video, I did a couple of trial and error methods. I attempted to use this stuff. It is RIT Dye More Synthetic. Dye More meaning it dyes more better, and synthetic means plastic. So the idea was to heat up the fretboard markers enough to let the heat and the whatever chemicals are in this stuff to work together to dye the markers. Unfortunately, that did not work. There wasn't really a way to get the fretboard markers hot enough. Normally you would dip the plastic in boiling water and use this kind of dye, and it would theoretically work. But of course, I could not apply it in that manner with the fretboard markers embedded in the fretboard wood. So that didn't work. And then subsequent to that experiment, I used a combination of these two products. This is OD Clear Cleaner for ABS PVC and CPVC, and this is the good old Kiwi Brown Shoe Polish. And so the idea behind this was that this stuff sort of melts the top layer of the plastic, and then this sort of locks on the color. Now I got good results with that method, but I will be honest that over time I feel like it wasn't dark enough for me. Either that or it was coming off just a little bit. So essentially I wanted something a little bit darker, something to sort of match the overall motif of this heavy relic style Stratocaster guitar, to give it a vintage look and to make it look like real clay dots that had over time soaked up the oils and resin of the fingerboard. So in summary, I used dark brown leather dye on this fretboard with great results. I'm very happy with it. Not only the dark, rich rosewood color of the fingerboard itself, but as a bonus, like I I said, the fretboard markers have a great vintage color to them. Now I will say this, if you have fresh sort of brand new fretboard markers, either dots on like a Tele or a Strat style guitar, Jazzmaster, whatever, even maybe a Les Paul, the trapezoid inlays, I would suffice it to say that this leather dye would not necessarily stick to that and make it darker. And that might be your goal. Maybe you don't want dark fretboard markers. I can't say that for sure because I haven't personally tested it on any sort of untouched fretboard markers. These I had previously scuffed up with some sandpaper, and so they sort of had micro scratches already in the fretboard markers in the plastic, and so the leather dye was able to kind of soak into those small cracks and give an overall appearance of a darker fretboard marker. So depending on the shape of your fretboard markers, if they have a clear coat over them and like I said, they're fresh and they're new and they haven't been touched or scratched up, it's likely that the dye is just going to rub right off of them. But again, I can't say for sure. You may have mixed results, but I can tell you what I did, and I can tell you that I scratched these up a little bit and it took the dye really well, and that was what I was after, so that worked out really well. Okay, thanks for sticking with me and letting me set this video up. Now I'm going to show you how I applied the leather dye to the fretboard step by step. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you get something out of it. As always, please subscribe and click the little bell for notifications of new videos, and we'll see you in the next video. Okay, I'm about to dye the fretboard. This is the neck of my Stratocaster. It is, of course, off the body of the guitar. I could have taped the body up and covered it, but I thought I'd just take the neck off. It'd be easier. My plan is to use this Fiebing's dark brown leather dye. I've heard some people using black. A lot of people use India ink, which Stuart McDonald sells, but I'm gonna try this. I didn't really necessarily want to go for black, but I do want a really dark, rich brown. So we'll see how this works. My tactic is to use some sandpaper. I've got 400 grit here. I thought that would be a happy medium, not too coarse, not too fine. Anyway, I just want to get any of the oils that I can off of the fretboard. Any oils like from my hands, any oils from fretboard conditioner, which I have put on here before. But needless to say, there is probably some gunk and some things embedded in the wood, in the rosewood of this neck. So I'm going to take some 400 grit sandpaper and try to get that off as best I can. And then once I do that, I've got some paint thinner I'm going to use to kind of clean it off a little bit. A lot of people use naphtha and I don't have any. I think this is going to accomplish the same thing. We shall see. And then I'm going to use some painter's tape just around the edges. I don't care too much to try to get it on the edge of the rosewood fretboard. Actually, quite a bit of the fretboard is in these areas where the finish is not taken off. So this portion here and all this portion down here has nitrocellulose finish on it, so the dye is not going to really go into that. I definitely don't want the dye on any of the maple parts or the nut or anything like that, so I'm just going to try to tape off, you know, as best I can around here so the dye doesn't drip down or anything. I'm also thinking that the sandpaper is going to take off a little bit of the coloring of the fretboard markers, the white dots, so that's okay. I'm hoping that the dye will actually make them go back a little bit clay, and if not, I can go back to my other method. Up here above the nut has a nitrocellulose finish. That's pretty typical of Fender necks, that they're, I guess, taped off around the nut area. And so this area appears not going to get any kind of dye on it, or if it does, it's not really going to soak in, and I don't want to risk getting dye on the headstock itself. So that is the plan. We will proceed and I'll show you how it goes. Okay, I've gone over the fretboard with 400 grit sandpaper. I'm going to go over it with some steel wool, some quadruple aught steel wool, just to even things out and make sure there's no scratches. But you can tell it looks pretty pale and kind of dried out. So once I do that, I'll clean it with the paint thinner. Okay, I vacuumed up my steel wool shavings, which is always a good idea to do because that stuff gets everywhere. Now it's time for a little paint thinner to hopefully clean up the fretboard of any kind of remaining oils or anything that are still there. Got the neck taped up now around the edges, as you can see. Nothing too fancy or too accurate. I just want to make sure that there's no really bad drips or anything down the sides, and hopefully this will catch any of that, or it'll go over the tape and not stain anything. I don't know for sure, but just taking proper precautions. So now I think we're pretty much ready for the stain or the dye, and yeah, that should be it. They say to use gloves when doing something like this. I'm not usually a glove wearer, but I actually have these gloves sitting around, some extra ones that I got at some point. So I'll put those on, but as you can see, I've already got some on my finger from opening the jar itself. There was a, protective cap on there. And so, yeah, I've already got some on my fingers. So we'll try to get the rest of that plastic off with the gloves on. And yeah, it also comes with one of these things, a little applicator in the box when you get it. So that should be helpful in applying. What I don't want to do for sure is spill this everywhere. Okay, here we go. Oh, it really soaks into that applicator. So at this point, I'm just kind of letting it soak in. What I hope I didn't do is get any of the dye. It did drip down a little bit there, but it did not get on the back of the neck here. But I hope those areas where it did kind of get on the tape, I hope it didn't stain the back of the neck. That would suck. All right, but I'm gonna let it dry for a little bit. Actually, I may go ahead and try to wipe it off at this point, and then I wanna check that tape to make sure that I haven't ruined something. Well, it looks pretty dark now, and my dots are pretty brownish. So I'm gonna try to take my gloves off and take the tape off and see, hopefully no damage is done. Okay, so full disclosure, because I always try to tell the truth if I screw up. I did not get any of the stain or the dye on this part of the neck. You can see a little bit of discoloration there. Actually, I think where my fingers have been touching it. Anyway, I need to get that off. I was able to sand off a little bit of that. What it did not work out well was I got a little bit where I overlapped the tape. I don't know if you can see that. It's not gonna focus very well. Yeah, right there. I had to scrape it off a little bit. I tried to use paint thinner, it didn't work. And I actually took some of the nitrocellulose off. Now, I obviously have a relic neck and I'm okay with that, but this is a warning, if you're gonna do this, to be careful. So I'm really pleased with this. On the video camera right now, it looks a little yellowy, but from where I'm standing, it looks really good. It really looks like I wanted it, what I've been wanting it to look like the whole time, especially the clay dots. I am kind of annoyed about this spot here. I think that's gonna be covered up by the body of the guitar, the neck joint. So that's not a huge deal. And again, it's a relic, so any kind of dings or dents are sort of acceptable, but that's not really what I wanted. But I'm really pleased with the look of this, really pleased. It doesn't look like a new neck anymore, it looks more vintagey. So I think just because I've got this out, I think I'm gonna retape and reapply. What I don't wanna do is, and I think my, if I had a mistake that I made, as I got this a little bit too soaked into the dye, so it's dried out a little bit, so I might just take what I've got on there and reapply. We'll see how that goes, but yeah, I would recommend not soaking it in there, especially at first. Just get a little bit on and go at it and then see how it goes. I was a little bit too ambitious with that. So this time I used one continuous piece of tape all the way around the neck so there's no gaps. And I pressed down really hard to make sure that it's making good contact all around the edge of the fretboard. And like I said, I'm not going to dip this. I'm just going to leave whatever's on there and try to apply it for this second go around. Get my paper towel ready for these edges, just to make sure nothing soaks up on the edges. This second application is pretty well soaked into the board now, so I'm going to go ahead and just wipe off the excess here and see where we're at. Now that we're it dried off from the second coat, I'm going to take some more paint thinner, just go over it and see if anything comes off. Make sure there's no excess coming off. Yeah, so I'm really pleased with the way this is looking. The fretboard itself looks more uniform, I guess more like Indian rosewood or ebony even, where you don't see as many streaks. The streaks are cool and the texture is cool. Obviously, you know, the grain is great, but I just wanted to look more aged and less light with like stripes through it, and it really looks a lot better in my opinion. I'll put up a before and after of you know, what it looked like originally and what it looks like now. If you have a Strat and you're worried about your fretboard markers becoming dyed, I don't know what to tell you for sure, but I do know from just another experience that if you have a hole puncher, you could take some painter's tape and get a hole puncher and punch out little holes of painter's tape and put over your dots. It could help, at least try to help and protect them. You may get kind of bleed over. I guess the most ideal thing would be to maybe get a brush, do the tape, and then maybe do a brush and just try to go around them to be super precautious. So I can't say for certainty because mine were already sort of worked on and exposed and not fresh or new. Mine sort of soaked up some of that dye and look more clay or aged clay now, which I'm super stoked about. I really wanted them to look like that. That was just a benefit and a side effect. And that's actually one reason why I did not want to go with the black dye, because I thought it may color the dots in a sort of gray fashion or something that looked more unusual or more unnatural than aged clay. So I'm really pleased with this dark brown, and I'm gonna probably let this dry a little bit more, just make sure everything's kind of evaporated. And then I've heard that you can take some fretboard conditioner and go over it lightly and it'll kind of set it or soak it in or protect it. So I may do that once this is all kind of dried out. So as I was looking at this part of the fretboard that extends past the nut and is adjacent to the headstock, it really kind of stood out and looked different than the rest of the fretboard. It had a lot of striping, which I'll show you on the video here. A little bit of footage I took before. But what I did is I taped it off really well. I put the tape a little bit ahead of the headstock so that there wouldn't be any kind of bleed line just in case. So I didn't put it right on that line, I put it more on this side. And then I taped all around, taped the nut up. And what I did, I just took a little bit of this fairly dry applicator and went over the top of the nitrocellulose. And I knew because of the little screw ups that I had down here on the end of the neck that it would stick onto the nitrocellulose. So it did, and it doesn't come off of my fingers or anything. So I think it's gonna be safe, and it did darken it up. And it just looks like now that it's the same color as this with a clear coat over it, which is what it usually looks like. So that's the tip. It worked out pretty good for me. And if you wanna do something like that, try it out. I'm gonna take a fresh, clean paper towel now and just see if I can get anything off of the fretboard, any kind of excess that might get on my fingers now before I put on the fretboard oil or conditioner. There's a little bit coming off, not a whole lot. So I think at this point, pretty safe to put on the conditioner and kind of seal it in, which I will do with a different clean paper towel. I'm going to apply F1 oil now. I have a video on this stuff kind of explaining what's in it and how it compares to some of the other fretboard conditioners out there. I think it's pretty good and it's pretty reasonably priced. So I'm just going to put a little bit on there, not a whole lot, just like I said, to kind of protect my hands and sort of set in the stain or the dye, hopefully. Looks like it's cleaning off a little bit of the dye.
That's all, folks.